Hi, everyone. It's Andrew with the Alliance for Innovation Infrastructure. And this August is Energy Month, which means we're sitting down with industry professionals to talk about their experience and share their perspective on the energy resource relevant to their work. Today, I would love to introduce our friend, Tom Guthrie, former plant manager for Duke Energy. Hey, Tom, how's it going?
I'm doing well. Hope you are.
I am doing so well today.
Right.
I think what we'll do is just dive in really quickly. My first question is, what was your line of work and what did you do specifically?
Oh, that's a good question. So, I was an engineer. Had a mechanical engineering background. I worked in mainly coal-fired generation. Did that for several years. The last 15 years of my career, I was a plant manager, here in North Carolina, where I now live, in San Diego, which was a gas-fired plant, about 3 miles from the Mexican border on San Diego Bay. Worked in Indiana at a big coal-fired plant. So my last 15 years are very focused on generation, in particular, coal-fired generation. I did a little bit of environmental work as well as I finished my career. So
incredible. How would you define coal as an energy resource?
How would I define coal as an energy resource?
Coal is typically found deep within our Earth's surface, but can also be found closer to the surface as well as in mountains. In the United States, their mines and reserves are typically found in the Appalachian region, while also on the other side of the country in the western Great Plains region. Coal is one of the cheapest forms of energy. Some estimates say that $800 worth of coal-produced electricity can power the average American home for a year.
Well, it's been critical through the years. I will say that coal as a source of energy, particularly for the eastern part of the country. So it's just critical for the industry. And I know coal is sort of going away, but it still is a very important source of energy as we generate electricity. I mean, that's a huge piece of what we use coal for. To me, it's just one of those really critical resources when we look across the spectrum of nuclear and gas and, now wind and solar. Fossil fuels are still huge in generating what we need from an energy and electricity standpoint, just really critical.
So jumping off of that, what are the challenges that come with it?
Oh boy. Years ago, I think it used to be easy to generate electricity with coal or gas. Nuclear is a little bit different, but the challenges have become more environmental.
So let's talk about land footprints though. Land footprints, every form of energy has one, and it's just the amount of space taken up by the production and then just use of that form of energy. So for coal, that would include all the mines, all the roads and railways leading to and from the mines, the production centers, the waste centers. All of that together equals about 650,000 acres, which is roughly equivalent to the size of Yosemite National Park. Coal also produces several toxic pollutants as well that can come out just in the regular mining or the production process at all stages. And those can leak into our airways or into our natural habitats and ecosystems or even our bodies if we're not careful. Overall, coal is going down in production. In 2022, about 19% of the American energy source came from coal, which is actually a 50% decrease from the last 10 years. Globally, coal is used for about 35% of energy production, which is about a 12% decrease in the last 10 years.
How do you deal with coal ash? How do you make sure it's properly managed? How do you deal with NOx and SOx? I may be talking too technical here, but how do you deal with the emissions? And how do you deal with them appropriately? And I always used to tell people in the neighborhood, hey, I want to make sure the air is clean. I want to make sure the water's clean. Myself, I live in the neighborhood. I live here. So it's really critical. So, and I'll tell you, Andrew, when I was, the last two plants were really big plants. We installed billions of dollars in environmental equipment.
Wow.
Just to help with the emissions. And I will tell you, the coal plants that are still operating, and they all have environmental controls now, it is just so critical that those are operated correctly so the emissions aren't as big an issue. And emissions have been reduced immensely. I don't think people realize how much the emissions from a coal plant, how much it has improved. I'm talking 80 to 90% improvements.
Wow.
Really,
That's
really.
potential.
Yeah, and it's really, some of it's in the 95%. I mean, it's really high. So really good stuff. Those were probably the biggest challenges of the last 20 years.
Can
Yeah.
you elucidate on the equipment that you're referring to?
So, one of the big things was something called a scrubber. And you've heard of acid rain probably, and you don't hear much about it anymore because really scrubbers have removed the SO2, the sulfur dioxide, out of the emissions. From a coal-fired plant. It's not total, but it's in the usually in the 95% or more with a scrubber. And it's just a process you go through, how you take the exhaust gases from the boiler, and you do some things to it, and what comes out of it is gypsum, which, by the way, can be put into wallboard. And that's exactly what is done with it in most cases. I know the plants I worked with, we sent that, to a gypsum wallboard plant, and then it goes into building homes. It's recycling. It's totally really recycling. So I don't think most people realize what's going on with that. So, used to put that, you might have put, some of the coal ash in the ground. With the coal ash, I can get excited about this now.
Get excited.
Yeah, the coal ash, in a lot of cases, you'd landfill that ash. You burn coal, you get ash. So what did we do with it? In particular, at the one major plant here in North Carolina I was at, we would send it to a cement company. And the properties of the ash actually increased the strength of the cement.
Wow.
We were sending thousands and thousands of coal ash to a cement company, and they would mix it into their cement and increase the strength of their cement. And where did that go? Into buildings? It's amazing. I just don't think people hear these stories about what are we doing? We're recycling it. It's recycling, just like we all want to do. So that stuff really gets me excited, because it used, the coal ash used to we'd put it in a big pit, and hopefully that pit would be lined, so it didn't get into the groundwater. So that, but now it's recycled a lot. And I think that's just a story that probably isn't heard as much as it should be. So
I definitely think people are too focused on the the buzzwords like environmental impact. And thinking about fossil fuels and decarbonization, and they neglect to realize that innovative solutions such as these to recycle is so monumental.
Yeah, it's huge. It really is. So I'm all for that stuff. It's a challenge for the plant, to run that equipment, but we run it every day, so cool stories to me. Those are really good stories, about how we can help the environment and produce electricity. So
Yeah, two birds with one stone, right?
That's right. So
well, actually, just moving off that, what else would you like the public to know?
Certainly the environmental piece, how from a coal-fired plant or even a gas-fired plant, it's very similar, in the story behind it. I mean, environmentally, it has become, it's such a plus. I got to tell this because this was years ago. When I lived in North Carolina, the plant that I was not the manager of, but I worked there, used to be able to see a brown haze. There it was a brown haze over the city. And after we installed that equipment, guess what we saw? It was gone. Absolutely. I still live in that same city, by the way, now. There is no brown haze from the power plant. It is absolutely gone. And that's the NOx particles. So it's gone. It just essentially is gone. So a really cool story. So that's probably, one of the bigger things. The environmental story is really huge. But I will tell you that, one of the concerns that I have today is, a lot of coal plants are being shut down, and solar and wind is coming on, which is a good thing, in my opinion. I don't think it really, people don't understand about the grid itself.
Yeah.
About the reliability of the grid and how important it is. Solar and wind is good, but what happens when the sun's not out and the wind's not blowing? there has to be something to replace that. And we're seeing that across the country. To me, it's very concerning that we're not concerned as much about the reliability of the grid. We're more concerned about shutting down coal plants or fossil fuel plants. And the sun and the wind is good, but it's not going to replace it. And it really has to do about, the solar and wind is really intermittent power sources. And it's not there all the time. When the sun goes down, what's going to replace it? You have to have something there. So in particular on hot days, solar and wind are not going to replace all that coal and all those natural gas plants. So that's another thing I wish the public was more aware of and understood as we transition to, cleaner energy. I don't feel like there's a very good plan, from our regulators and from our politicians. And I don't want to get political on it, but I know it's really important that people understand, because we need to have reliable energy,
Of course. Also considering the energy mix in America, right?
Yes. And I could talk about nuclear as well, because I think that's a big piece, down the road. Yeah, I mean, I think nuclear energy, what is it? How clean is nuclear? Carbon perspective, it's nothing, it is nothing there. And so I think nuclear can be a huge piece, and it should be down the road. I just believe it's this. And I know we have some waste we have to deal with there, but guess what? We have to deal with waste with coal, gas, and guess what? With wind turbine blades, when they fail, what do you do with them? It is waste, and some of it's hazardous. And in particular, the same thing with solar panels. All that material, the solar panel it's hazardous. And in about 20 years, and it's coming sooner than that probably, for both wind turbines, the blading, which is huge, and those solar panels, there's going to be a tremendous source of hazardous waste. And where do you put it? So we have to deal with waste no matter what energy source we're talking about. And I think that gets overlooked.
Yeah, the public perception, I think I was talking about this with a friend, and how solar and wind, they appear to be so innovative just because of the look, right? They are the epitome of innovation in terms of their curb appeal. But when it comes down to it, the amount of land space required for, solar farms, wind farms is substantial too. And also what you talked about, the materials that are necessary for creating them.
There's two other things that I heard recently that just astounded me. So I heard, when you put solar panels, on an area of land, and typically it seems like it's farmland, or it's, they've cleared a forest or whatever. I heard because of the makeup of the solar panels, and there's rain and there's runoff and all that, you'll never farm that land again. And that, I was like, wow, I just didn't realize that. Yeah. And I know that there's some goals that people have put out there for, net zero for carbon, and, and I heard this, I read this, and I went, because I really do look at this still, even though I'm not as active in the industry, I'm still very aware, and I talk to a lot of energy people. You have to cover 5 states totally with wind turbines.
Yeah.
And this would be, I hope I get this right, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Tennessee, Kentucky. Those are the 5 states to achieve net zero by 2035. And think about that. It's unbelievable the amount of space it would take to really totally replace a lot of the generation, non-wind, non-solar. So I mean, it's monumental. I could go on and on. There's all sorts of statistics about what it would take from a transmission standpoint, transmission lines as well. It's really astounding to think where we're headed. And that's just a concern, how do we sort of transition to a cleaner energy system, but do it in a smart way, and it's a reliable way for the grid, so to speak. So
I think one of the best questions is, how do you define efficiency? How as a nation do we define efficiency? What does that mean to us, and how should we go about it? Because like we said, every aspect that we're talking about results in waste. That's the other thing. I don't think we actually look at the big picture always. We don't
we don't look at it from, we've talked a lot about batteries, with in the industry and how important they are, and electric cars and all this. But what does it take from start to finish,
The battery, right?
from the mining aspect? And what about the waste that comes from the mining aspect? So when we sort of look at sort of the end, but we don't look at the full process, and how efficient is it in regards to waste and cost. And it just doesn't seem we always look at total cost and impact to society as well. So how are we actually mining, and where is it being done, and how is it impacting that area? Is it safe? It's just, there's not a lot of thought until you get to the end.
Well, my last question would be, what would you like policymakers and lawmakers to know if they were to know anything about striving for a more efficient outcome?
I wish they knew what it was really going to impact in a transition, just from the big picture. I mean, what we just talked about, I think, is just so important, that they do really step back and really look at it. It's a complicated thing. You talk about the grid, that's the sort of hard to understand, for the average person. But there are some basics I think everybody can understand, and whether it's the regulatory people or, our elected officials, they have to really look much deeper than they are, instead of what's more the popular thing to do, because it's the current, thing that a lot of people want to do. But you really have to step back and really take a deep dive and really gain an understanding. I really think in some ways the worst decision makers on this whole thing are the politicians, because it does become political. I think you really have to turn to people that understand the industry and want to move forward with it, don't want to get stuck. But I think the people that really understand, the energy industry and have the right motive, because not everyone has the right motive, they have to really listen to those people and have a great understanding of, the whole system, what it takes. They understand the grid. They know how nuclear works. They know how coal works. They know how these energy sources, solar, wind. And then really step back and put together a good plan that's going to take us in the right direction and is the most benefit for our country, and now, as it's for the world, because we're all moving, in the same direction.
Yeah, and especially if we're going to be setting an example, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's awesome. I'm so happy that we got to talk about this.
Yeah,
your perspective, and hearing a few of the basics of coal. It's interesting, the things that I see as someone who will scroll through social media and seeing people's opinions and their very surface level point of view on different energy sources. And people are fighting for so many things because they are their desire is to get to the end goal now. Everyone wants that gratification, and what we've talked about with, not understanding the long-term effects of A, B, C, or D.
Right.
And has been, around for a very long time.
There is another thing that you just prompted me to think about, excuse me, and it's about the climate change. That subject is another source that I don't think we look at close enough. Has man impacted the climate? Sure it has. There's a lot of stuff that impacts the climate, so I'm not denying, man does impact it some. I don't think it's quite the emergency that everyone says it is. I've studied a lot about it. I just read about it all the time, and there's varying opinions. And I think, again, this is where you have to look bigger picture. You got to look back at the 10,000 years, which you can. And there's ways to do it, and just see what has happened with climate in the past. And it's
separating fact from fiction.
Yes. And I think there's a lot of fiction now, and it's done for political reasons, unfortunately, I think. But I do think the data is there, and I'm a data guy. I believe, let's just show me the data, and let's see what it's telling us. Because, there's actually been warmer periods in the last 10,000 years than there is now. And I don't think people understand that. Sea levels have been rising for 250 years. It just hadn't started in the last 50 years or since the Industrial Revolution. I mean, the facts are there. I just wish people, again, would really step back and look at the data, because the data, is going to tell you something. It's going to tell you the right story. So it's just, that's one of those things, that's a big piece of what's driving us, is this whole climate discussion. But there are a lot of factual information that doesn't get out. And I think it's politically motivated, I think, in a lot of ways, but we just got to look at the facts. Anyway,
thank you so much.
Yes, I hope this was helpful.
I really appreciate you being here. It's been so great.
To learn more about coal and all other forms of energy, you can visit aii.org.